Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Risk Matrix, a new episode with James Junkin.
James Junkin, roll tide, go no Navy, baby. It's football season, Thanksgiving around the corner. Great time of year. Roll tide.
Roll Tide, and myself, Dr. Martin. And we're going to talk today a little bit about child labor. It's been in the news lately, and also youth safety. But James, do you have a note from who's sponsoring us today?
Yes, today's episode of the Risk Matrix powered by Veriforce is sponsored by Veriforce Hub partner 360 Immersive. 360 Immersive is a creative team of software developers that specialize in the production of interactive training aids that support instructor and virtual instructor-led training, as well as safe, self-paced e-learning courses. So members of the Veriforce Network can receive up to a 20% discount on any My Virtual Safety Trainer courses featuring virtual reality simulations and gamification content. No VR headset is required. For more details on this special offer, visit 360immersive.com/Veriforce.
Beautiful. Thanks, James, for that note from every time from the note from people that are sponsoring us to get this out there and to get people to listen to our chats, because whether we're interesting or not, we think we're interesting, and we try to look at topics that are kind of up and coming in the news, which you noted that there are some things lately on child labor. I think we're all familiar with it in the 1800s and early 1900s, everywhere around the world and in developing countries as well. Um, Tell me a little bit about some of the things you've seen in the news lately.
Well, it's been emerging as a topic amongst the third-party verification systems of late. I've seen requirements for policies for U.S. companies to describe their systematic programs to prevent exploitation of children in the labor force. And when I first saw it, I thought that's a little surprising. I mean, we do have child labor laws, and recently, in my home state of Alabama, Roll Tide, there was a automobile manufacturer down into the supply chain that was busted for employing youth, underage youth, and then later in a restaurant situation in Kentucky. So this is becoming an issue. Our partners at Chaz on their podcast in the UK just recently had a great podcast episode discussing child labor issues in the EU. And so I thought it was time maybe we should take a little look at this within the United States. And I was surprised at some of the research that's come out when you and I began to look into this topic, that the total number of violations, while it's lower than it was 20 years ago, it is on the rise. And 2022 actually saw more cases of violations of child labor provisions in federal law than it has been in many, many years. So obviously, we're seeing an increase since 2015 of child labor law violations, and I think it's something we should talk about.
So I'm with you there. I just want to add that I read in preparation for this episode that a lot of states in the United States are trying to lower the age that young workers can get work permits. I don't know if this is in response to some of these quote unquote violations. I think people are a lot younger. But this goes right along with youth workers and preparing them to be safe in the workforce. And how do we do that, right? I did read the same articles that you did about the cleaning companies. They had people coming in and cleaning factories, underage workers, undocumented, etc. And I think the for companies, right? I think it's a lack of workers in general, right? With the pandemic that we had, a lot of workers left the workforce. A lot of people are staying remote. A lot of people are hesitant to go back into jobs where they have a lot of contact with people. So that's one thing. And then with the leaving of those workers, companies are looking for minimum wage people to fill jobs, right?
Right.
And this is an issue, like I said, because of safety concerns, safety training, etc. Regardless of what your state laws are for hiring the workers, there's still a gap there, especially in retail, cleaning, restaurant service, etc., that young people are filling because they're in need of a job.
I don't want to discourage people from hiring youth. One of my first jobs, or in fact, my very first job was working at Piggly Wiggly in Gordo, Alabama, in a grocery store. And it was great. It gave me spending money. It taught me responsibility. It gave me a great experience to grow on as I learned how to be a good employee. And so, most violations are occurring in places where it's appropriate for minors to work, like you mentioned, like restaurants and fast food chains. That was one of my examples in Kentucky. But when we start thinking about manufacturing, when we start thinking about construction, and even where the laws are a little bit looser at the federal level in the agricultural area, investigators are finding more and more children that are working in dangerous jobs. So while we want to encourage employers to have programs for youth, maybe, after school programs or work study type programs, things of that nature, be careful, understand what the law is and how to protect those workers. And there are extreme and very specific federal laws, federal child labor laws, that detail what work children can perform and what is deemed hazardous. So, as we're getting these requests for your policies, for your procedures on preventing the abuse and exploitation of children in the workplace, the very first step is understanding what is the law. And as you said, Dr. Martin, some states are working to loosen some of these laws to allow even younger children to come into the workforce. And while that may be good, they're an employee and we want to protect those employees just like we do our other employees.
So, James, I didn't work at the Piggly Wiggly, but we did have those in Wisconsin. We still do. We call it the pig, right?
The pig.
Go to the pig to get our groceries. And I can remember, I'm kind of an oldie, but a goodie. But back in the day, getting a work permit in my area, which is a big farming area, was, I think it was 14 or 14 and a half, right? And so I think about my emotional, psychological state, ability to understand my learning style when I was 14 versus now. And so, one of the considerations I really think that has to come into play, if you are complying with the law for the age of workers in your state, that the learning principles are different, right?
Right.
And that you'd still have a responsibility to give them all the training that OSHA tells you should provide, and also to protect them from high hazard situations, right? Because I can think back to when I was 14 and even when I was in my early 20s, right? There's a lot of stuff that if somebody told me to do it in a work situation, I did it, right? And I look back now and I think, there's different supervision principles when you're young versus when you're older and you should quote unquote know better, right? So there's a huge responsibility there, even as companies look at their supply chain so they're not abusing the workers, but to also look at the actual population that is legal to work in your facility, what they are doing, like you said, right? What is considered hazardous or not, or appropriate or not, and then to provide training in the manner that they can comprehend and digest, right?
And I think that's a point. I don't want to interrupt you, Dr. Martin, because that'd be rude. But right here, there needs to be a parenthesis in what you just said: training in a manner that they can comprehend and understand. A lot of times, I think what we're seeing in the place where there might be exploitation, even if it's unintended exploitation of children in the workplace, or violations of federal and state law, this typically is happening in the immigrant community. So it's in a language they can understand and comprehend. and in a manner that they can comprehend. Because young workers young employees learn differently than adult learners. For years, the safety profession has been working to transition out of the teaching children mode into addressing the needs of adult learners. I wonder if we've gone to the point where we've forgotten how to address children and how they go about learning when we have these specific situations when we have children in the workplace. So it's
And
consideration.
this is something that people need to learn early, right? Because if you come into the workforce at 14, 15 years old, depending on what your state and the federal laws are, if you learn to do dangerous things, or you learn that certain things are okay, or you're guided by the wrong mentor, that those are things that can carry through, well into your working career, right? And I've seen that happen. I've seen that happen with workers in their 18 and older, 20, etc., who are legal to do a lot of these high hazard jobs. If you don't know, a lot of times you do things and you get used to doing things a certain way, and that's dangerous.
Yeah, if you learn bad habits early on, they tend to continue to be habitual, and you see it again in their adult lives. So if you learned wrong, you tend to continue to do it wrong. You become resistant for changing.
And that's an organizational responsibility.
It is. And I think from an organizational standpoint, where we run afoul is, you have a federal law. For example, you mentioned work papers in your state back when you were a child in Wisconsin. Some states require that. Federal law does not. Federal law does not require you to obtain working papers. So if you're a multi-state employer, as you're developing this program, as many of the companies that listen to us on this podcast are, you need to work with HR to make sure that you're understanding what the states require in your particular state. It's not simply requiring following the laws of the federal regulations regarding federal youth employment. Now, the second point, okay, is you have restrictions at the federal level of the number of hours or days or times of day that workers 16 years of age or older may be employed. And then you have state requirements that may be more stringent. So anytime you run into a regulation, a law, you're always going to have to obey the most stringent, and these can vary throughout the United States.
Yeah. So I'm gonna jump back to something that you started with on the podcast. Let's talk about supply chain. Let's talk about misuse of child labor. Let's talk about all the things that you just kind of wrapped into state laws. And when it comes to the supply chain, it comes to responsibility, right? It's not always about what happens here where we are in the United States. A lot of times, if you drill down into your supply chain, and I use this, one of my daughters is studying supply chain in school. She's 11 years old, right? And we were talking about supply chain, and I was talking about how, where my shirt comes from, right? And where the textiles come from, and where, who stitches it, and who cuts the textiles, and how they're made. And they're not always here in the United States, right? The supply chain drills down to, places like India, which does a lot of textile work, textile labor. There's a lot of child labor in India, but all of these things reflect up in your supply chain to who you are as a company. Okay.
Definitely going to be part of any type of ESG considerations. And we've had multiple episodes. You've written extensively about ESG and the concerns that hiring clients and should have about weaknesses within their supply chain. And that's what we're seeing as well, is now in the contractor realm, hiring clients are beginning to use third-party verification systems like Veriforce to ask about, what are you doing as a contractor, as a supplier, for whatever goods and services that we're acquiring from you, to ensure that you're not violating some of these acceptable standards, international standards regarding child labor. So while they may not have a specific law, I'm not saying that they do or don't. I'm not a India expert on child labor there, but there's certain expectations I think the international community has about not exploiting children. So inside the policy of the hiring client, make sure that you're setting those expectations up for your supply chain, because they will be part of your ESG reporting. What happened in Alabama was a huge automobile manufacturer. It was a supplier of that automobile manufacturer within the United States had an underage worker. So I think it's probably good to maybe talk about occupations that are banned for all minors under the age of 18. If you hire someone over the age of 18, you can employ them in any type of capacity that's legal and ethical, right? So, number one, minors under the age of 18 cannot work in manufacturing or storing of explosives. So, that doesn't mean they can't work in retail stores where they sell ammunition or guns or skeet ranges or at the police station. But if I think this pretty much, if you're working around any type of organization that manufactures or stores explosives, then you got to be over 18.
I would imagine that includes fireworks manufacturers.
I would definitely think that includes fireworks. And when we're thinking about this, probably in the oil and gas industry, that would include wireline operations. Okay.
Yep. How about process safety?
Motor vehicles, or work as an outside helper on motor vehicles. So you cannot hire someone to be operating a company vehicle or work on those motor vehicles, in general. So I cannot have a 16-year-old that was running parts for me in the vehicle or making deliveries for me. That might be something that you might think and you might miss, right? They have a driver's license, are authorized to do that. And these are the federal laws, right? So looking at the federal level, the federal regulations bans operating motor vehicles on public roads and working as outside helpers on motor vehicles, except 17-year-olds may drive cars or small trucks during daylight hours for limited times and under strictly limited circumstances. So if you're going to hire someone to do those type of things, you better do some research, and you can find that at the Department of Labor on what they're allowed to do. That way you don't run afoul of that.
Now, whereabouts, just for the listeners, whereabouts on the Department of Labor website would they go to look for either that list that you're referencing or to kind of research on their own?
I think you could go to dol.gov /agencies /WHND, WHD /child labor. And you could go into that website and really start downloading the tools that small employers and large employers can use in order to craft these policies and procedures under federal law. But again, there are a lot of different things in different states that are more restrictive than what federal law is. So what we're talking about today is sort of federal law, but your local law may apply. Other areas and occupations that do not allow workers under 18 to work. Forest firefighting. That just kind of makes sense. Forest fire prevention. Timber track, out there working in timber track, right? Forestry service, occupations in logging and sawmilling operations. Now, my dad would be shocked to know that you can't work in logging, because I was part of the loading operation of pulpwood back in the day. So my dad was in violation of federal law by allowing me to do that. But it's dangerous work, right? It's dangerous work. Woodworking machines. I know you're an avid woodworker. I've seen some of your stuff. How about power-driven woodworking machines? That includes typical machines you've seen in woodworking shops, chainsaws, nailing machines, sanders, those of that nature. Now, here's one that I was a little bit surprised, but it kind of makes sense. Exposure to radioactive substances and ionizing radiation. So if we were working in a oil and gas industry, maybe in a pipe situation, where we're removing norm, I think that would apply, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah. There are some construction circumstances where they use meters to measure with radioactive substances to measure
Right.
concrete and settlement, etc. So I think that would apply. There would be some construction operations where there's some radioactivity involved in the soil or in construction materials. So that would apply, right? I was thinking, and is this on the list? Power and transmission. I would think that some type of electrical would also be on there as well.
Absolutely. Speaking of powered, how about powered apparatus like forklifts,
Forklifts, telehandlers.
telehandlers, skid steers, backhoes, man lifts,
Mhm.
scissor lifts, cherry pickers, boom
Cranes.
trucks.
Cranes. I mean,
Yeah.
there are a bunch of things. I think people just need to be really careful what kind of situations. I look at it this way, and this would give me pause. Would I want my child working under conditions where they didn't have the right information and or might come in harm's way? Right. I mean, and everybody's judgment is different, and that's why you refer to the regulations first and what kind of supervision they have and all of those things before you kind of go down that road. So I'm going to transition a little bit to this youth worker concept in the United States. There's been a large push to educate youth workers on safety, right? Some of the schools are now, if it's a technical school, are including OSHA 10, which we all know OSHA 10 is not a solution to everything, but they at least include OSHA 10 as part of their trade experience in technical trade schools, in other trade schools. I know NIOSH has an initiative on their website for youth worker safety education. I probably think CPWR construction, the construction site
Right.
probably has that. The North American Labor's Fund probably has something, and there are many others. You can just go on and search youth worker safety, and you'll get a plethora of resources, right? But any business that employs children under the age 18 and within the bounds of your state law, right, should have a youth worker training program that encompasses training at their level, training that's appropriate to the hazards that are present. I mean, we hear this all the time about adults, right, in the workforce. I don't know if I was working in a McDonald's or any other fast food restaurant that I would know fryer safety, right? Or slip, strips, and falls, because, in kitchens, and I did this in the insurance industry, kitchens get very greasy. There's not a lot of traction, and there's a lot of hazards within a kitchen. So, just
And
a
there are a
few
lot of
mentions.
rules around that, working in these fast food restaurants, at what age you can work at some of these fryer and more dangerous and more hazardous type occupations. So it really comes down to, if you're going to employ people under the age of 18, or your contractors are going to employ people under the age of 18, you really need to dig into what the rules and the regulations are. And really what we're seeing is workers, you kind of expect at 16, 17, you're starting out and you're getting your first job and you're paying for your vehicle. If you were like my mom and dad, I had to pay for my vehicle, I had to pay for my insurance, I had to pay for my gas. And I learned early on, if you're going to date someone, if you walk alone, right? If you're going to date at 16, you need to ride, or no
Yep.
one's going to go with you. So, but you're starting to see younger people get into the workforce. I mean, 13-year-old, 14-year-olds. And a lot of times those are manual labor type jobs. I'm not talking about agriculture. That's a whole different conversation. There are a lot of different rules with agriculture. But were you aware that 13 and 14-year-olds are banned from roofing operations?
No, but it makes perfect sense to me as a safety professional, right? I had a brother that actually carried shingles on his shoulder up a ladder when he was 16, 17, 18 and going into college. And
And that would be, according to the Department of Labor, a violation, okay, of the child labor laws. And most people in this situation, you know, they're like, well, the guy's helping us out, strong young guy, put it on his shoulder. I did it when I was around that age. So you can run afoul of these rules if you don't educate yourself, and then you end up in an embarrassing situation for you, the people you employ, the folks you're working for. Like here's another one. I didn't realize this, that the act bans most jobs in trenching and excavation work.
I mean, as a safety professional, again, that makes sense to me, right? Because that it's hazardous. There's a lot of trenching, excavations, fatalities, serious injuries. Every year, you see them in the news way too much. And again, young people will do anything to please, please whoever they're working for. They're, if it's a family operation, and it really does not bode well to have them in situations where they can either make bad decisions because they're directed to, or make bad decisions because they just don't know any better.
So just kind of looking at this, under the child labor regulation, if you're looking at 14 or 15-year-olds in non-agricultural employment, so when can they work? Outside school hours, but no more than 3 hours on a school day, including Fridays. So you would think you get out of school at 3:15 or 2:30 or whatever. Hey, no more than 3 hours on a school day, including Fridays. No more than 8 hours on a non-school day. No more than 18 hours during a week when school is in session. And here's a kicker, and this happens in the summertime. No more than 40 hours during a week when school is not in session. Okay?
Yep.
And it says they can work between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., except between June 1st and Labor Day, when the evening hours extended to 9 p.m. So if you're operating a grocery store or a manufacturing facility or whatever, and you're getting folks to clean up, they got to clock out at 9 p.m.
Yeah. And I wonder how many people abide by that. I mean, that seems, even the grocery stores around here, you go in and they're working a full shift after on school nights. But at any rate, one more thing before we close this out, because I know we're getting close to time. And we'll get into this in probably our next episode, I'm guessing, right? And we talked a little bit about supply chain. We talked a little bit about subcontractors. And I think people should also be aware that just because you sub something out, just because somebody else is doing the job, you are responsible for your subcontractor and what they're doing as well. Okay. And that's a direct relationship. I know we talked supply chain, where we can get really far afoul of where we are, either around the world or with materials that go into what we make. But if you are a controlling contractor, a general contractor, a hiring client, that organization is responsible for what their subcontractors do. So you better be keeping a mind's eye on exactly what they're doing, exactly who they're hiring, how they're treating people, and whether or not, I mean, child labor is just one of the plethora of things that you need to keep track of.
I think that's where a tool like Veriforce has, everybody understands they have contractor management, but they also have subcontractor management. And a lot of times the hiring client does not have visibility or enough visibility into the subcontractor network. Many are surprised to even know these companies are working on their sites. Yep. So that creates not only an occupational safety and health risk, it creates a lot of other risk. And that's where some of these child labor law violations are coming from. They're a subcontractor of your contractor. So my advice to hiring clients is insist that your contractors understand what their responsibilities are. I did 2 assessments this past month of contractors that use subcontractors extensively. And this
don't give away our next episode, James. Don't give it away.
Can I give a hint?
Give a hint.
All right, here's the hint. exposure to the contractor from its hired subcontractor. Legal exposure.
All
We're going
right.
to talk about that on the next episode of the Risk Matrix. Hit that, smash that button, subscribe, and you'll get updates from YouTube when the next episode drops. Episodes drop every Tuesday afternoon. We look forward to our next episode. Thank you for following us.